Hello YouTube, Robin Hood Bricks here, and welcome to part 8 of Modular Mondays, where we'll be looking at the design process behind my fast food corner Modular MOC. So for those of you new to digital designing for Lego, this program is called LDD, which stands for Lego Digital Designer. And this is the program I use to create my MOC modular, all the way from very humble beginnings. It's by no means the only program available on the internet, but it is going to be the only one that I'm going to cover today, because what I'm not going to do today is try and do an introduction to the general topic of designing Lego digitally. I'm purely going to focus on the process that I went through of designing my modular, and then maybe in the future I'll do a general design series as well. But I may well do that in a different program than this, which I'll have to learn myself, because unfortunately Lego do not support LDD anymore, which means when they release new pieces, they aren't available for use, which is becoming more and more of an issue as more and more useful pieces are released. So it's my suggestion that you start trying one of the other programs, perhaps the Bricklink Studio program. After all, Lego has just bought Bricklink, so maybe they'll put some more focus into that. And also, it's a good program to use by all accounts, and you can easily add the parts that you need from a design that you've done onto a Bricklink wanted list. You could also do that using LDD, but it was a lot more complicated. Right, so those of you that watched part 1 of my series will recognize this. This is the very sort of crude MOC that I did for using the juniors window pieces. And what I'd done with this was just made a few columns. Imagined I had menus above each of the glass pieces and then a slightly raised floor which would have a table in the window. Now, one of the weaknesses of LDD is that it doesn't have every piece that's ever been made. And one of the pieces that it doesn't include is the juniors window pieces. So basically the first thing I had to do was create a sort of estimation of the space they took. So here's the one that represents the unbroken window panel, and here's one that represents the one with the door, and you can see I just put that in there. Now the fact that these bricks don't genuinely exist, like 1x8s in trans medium blue, doesn't really matter, because they're just a placeholder for making me understand roughly what it'll look like. But that is the humble beginnings with which we started in real life. So the first step I did was transfer that into LDD. And I think when starting a big project like this, you've got to have a good idea. So I think most of the planning needs to be done outside LDD before you start picking it up or picking up real life bricks, because otherwise you're just going to get lost in a sea of little ideas and offshoots very quickly. So my primary idea was to have the use of these juniors corner pieces on the corner, and for it to be a fast food restaurant, obviously, with a great big 3D burger sign right on the corner so you could see it. And quite frankly, the rest I didn't have any plans for whatsoever. So the first thing I did was basically take that mock-up and bring it to a 32x32 base plate. Now even then, you just don't know where exactly you're going to put it. But I figured that I would be able to guesstimate where it'd go. Something like that, giving a sort of 6 wide pavement or sidewalk on each direction, and then see what else I had room for. So for maximum variety, I thought I'd have one building on one side, so that would be quite a large building. So in that case, it'd be what, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 studs wide, which is plenty for a second building. And then on this side was much more cramped, but I wanted both a downstairs shop, but also a stairway up to the higher levels. So if you think about the absolute minimum you would need would be a doorway width for the stairwell, which is exactly what happened in real life, And then you'd need, probably as a minimum, a window and another window piece. So already you can see that that's the absolute minimum that I could have got away with. I couldn't move this any more towards this corner because it wouldn't allow me to fit anything else in. Indeed, even with this setup, I'm going to have the wall that divides the fast food from this first establishment behind one of these pillars, because there just isn't room otherwise. I don't really want the wall there behind a window. So now I've got my footprint, and this is really important. So now I know the limits of which I've got to design. So the first thing that I would do next is then do a rough mock-up of the fast food place. And the great thing is now, even though it's incredibly crude and rough, is that I've got the footprint for it. I know it has to be that big, no bigger, and no smaller, which is pretty small actually. So yeah, but that is the first stage. So the next thing I did was try and design the burger for the corner of my fast food corner. This would be very important because it will be the one thing that the whole block is named after. And you can see I tried a whole variety of different types, and it was largely limited by the types of pieces available because these quarter hemisphere pieces were only available in tan as a relevant colour for a burger anyway. And this dome piece was available, which is the one I ultimately used, but then only in dark tan, which initially I wasn't that sure of. So I tried all sorts of things. I tried embedding that dome into an arch piece. I tried mounting a bun on the wall with bricks on the side, or maybe just having it connected to a wall. But in the end, I picked this one, which I mounted onto the corner. I also started at that point making things to go on the insides. There's a drinks machine that ended up being a bit too big, and some pizza slices on a warmer, which did make the end build. And then I've missed out some steps, unfortunately, because I didn't save the file every time I did some work, just intermittently. But you can see inside this one, I started mocking up the entire inside, and at that point I had a windscreen piece as a kind of sneeze guard to a sandwich preparation area sort of thing, but that squidged the till far too much to one side, so in the end build I got rid of that. But you can see the drinks machine on the wall, and the grill, and the pizza warmer, and even those menus that have made the final cut. And the position of those was very much guided by what we were doing next door. So after I decided I wanted this nice ornate floor and I wanted it to go up a floor, I needed a set of stairs. And in order to fit this set of stairs in the most economical way, I wanted to embed them into the wall. Because when you're looking at a floor plan that's only this big, having a stairway that's 4 up one side and then maybe 4 up the back would mean you're very limited with what you've got left to work with, because all this space underneath the stairs ends up being very hard to see and pretty much dead space. So as I say, I put that into the wall, and that pretty much then guided what I did on this side. And I think that's an important procedure to take note of, really, that when you do an area, don't do it too thoroughly, because you'll probably have to come back to it with the changes that come from something else. So here I've just mocked up all these signs. None of this will make it because it's all based on bricks and is far too high for the first story, but you keep it there as an impression of what's going to end up there. And then when this stairway was in, it produced lots of little bits of dark red. So you can see there is one, and there's some behind this drinks machine as well. And they were all having to be concealed by the equipment on the wall. So this went through many iterations of being in completely different order until it was in a final resting position that I was happy with. So it's an iterative procedure. You do something on one side of the wall, then you kind of repair the other side, and then keep going to and fro until you're happy with it. And the same is true of things like this bit with the structure needing to be strong and this sort of stairwell needing to be built into this wall, which would then influence whatever's on this side, which ultimately ended up being the pharmacy. And whatever happens with this wall would obviously affect both sides of it, because having a wall that's the inside of the fast food joint and then having another wall so you can have the inside of the pharmacy and them not conflict with each other is just, again, another waste of space. So after doing that mock, I then moved on, and here I've started playing with the pharmacy sign, and that's not a million miles from where it ended up. And I also started playing with some windows over this doorway, which at this point I didn't know what this doorway was even leading to. And then I started playing with the upstairs. So you can see this is a very rough mock. We've got the ground level for the building that ended up being the pawnbroker, with the pawnbroker sign being at this level, and then the floor for this building being much higher, which would mean they'd end up having to be taken off independently as the modular progressed. And it gave me this awful mess on the inside, which took quite a lot of sorting out. So you can see this is very crude, especially up here. I mean, which one of these three levels is the floor level? It's very unclear at this stage, but it's just getting the idea of what shape the building will be first of all. And you can see what I tried first was to get these curved pieces that we did end up using, but going the other way, having them curving with the normal corner of the building. But the priority that I was trying to sort out at this point was having my holy trinity of fast food sign of burger, fries and shake up the wall, one above the other. So you've got to pick what is the most important feature, which for me was this sign, and then see what you can do to fit everything else around it. So then when I decided that I'd probably do this pharmacy, the next thing was to think about how I would produce that. And sometimes when you're just trying to fill a box, because essentially that's what this was going to be, if you think about the pharmacy, it's essentially a box of proportions, something like that, 8 by about 12-ish. So the best way to do something like that is to think about what you want inside it. So I did many iterations of the storefront because I knew that would be 8 wide, and playing around with lots of different signs. And I did lots of different iterations of a apothecary's cabinet and desks and counters and shelves. And these are only the final version, as you can see. And I did them both ways round, mirror images of each other, just so I could try them in different combinations and see if it looked better with the bay on the left or the bay window on the right, and so on. And here's a couple of attempts at the sign. And this one had 2 syringes on, for example. And this is some very early thinking about what could go in the pawnbroker shop with the pawnbroker sign. So, continuing through the different versions, which I've condensed into one file just to sort of help us look at them all side by side, I then managed to put all of that into a space for the pharmacy, and you can see that is very much true to the end position that we ended up in, and this shelf is hiding the reverse of those stairs, being the problem we had to sort out there, and that therefore decided where this wall was going to be, because arguably it could have been a bit more in, or it could have even been a bit more out, but the fact is, because I needed to fit all of this in a sort of spaced out and coherent way, it kind of defined where that was. I couldn't have decided this and then tried to fit the stuff in. It just wouldn't have worked that way. So now I've started to define this wall, which will be for the stairway. This upstairs is all a complete mess and is just an idea still. And incidentally, this curved window is actually the window that's on the Grand Emporium set. And I used that as a starting point because, you know, there's no point trying to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. but otherwise it's got very little features that are from the future. You can see here I've just recessed this one window, not all the others, but this particular one I've recessed by the half tile that ended up being the case for all of the windows. But I've got a white window ledge. I've started to have these white pillars, but they're just solid white, and so on. Now this version, compared with the last one, has actually brought in a couple of arch pieces to try and get round this curve, but still we're having problems with the corner bit, having diagonal pieces on, curved pieces on. It's a complete mess. So we had to keep working on that quite a lot more. So for the next version, I'd had the brainwave of putting outdoor adventure gear in the upstairs shop. So as a result, I decided to look through all the pieces that are on Lego Designer that would potentially go in my shop. And you can see I already had the idea of the climbing wall with two different ways of doing it. I already decided that I could stick a big raft on the wall. And because the tent piece isn't actually a piece in Lego Digital Designer, I built one out of bricks that is roughly the same proportion, just so I could play around with it. And here's some early coat hangers for bits of clothing that might be for sale, and lamps and cooking stoves and backpacks and so on, just to get it all laid out so I could sort of try and work out what might go where. So now I've focused on trying to get this floor all at one level, but I'm not doing very well because the floor, the second floor for the pawnbroker is down at this level, and this is right up at this level. So it's not going that well at this stage. I've started trying to use these angular bricks, see if they help, because I'm having real trouble fitting this burger, which I'm very much attached to, and these outward curving slopes and these outward sort of curved windows. So it's becoming a real problem. Then we go on a stage. I've started experimenting with even more different brick types and recessing and arch pieces and all the rest of it, but to no avail. So, I mean, what you should be getting from all of this is that there are a lot of iterations along the way, and these would have all been the result of, you know, a session of a couple of hours or something like that at least, and sometimes very little progress is made between the different versions. So here I think I've focused a bit more on the pawnbroker shop, started thinking about the carpet that's going in, and a good idea is to work out what bricks are available in what colours. So here we can see that the only modified bricks that are available in Sand Blue are these three. I checked that on Bricklink because there's absolutely no point building with bricks that don't exist. So a good reality check is to look at what bricks are available and maybe lay them out kind of as a sort of palette, if you will, to see what you can use in what position. Because these are the colour of bricks that I was going to be using on the next floor of the pawnbroker. Now, a really important change that I managed to do on this version, as you can see now, is that I managed to level up all the different elements of the first floor so they're all the same height. And I did that by moving away from the bricks holding up the facade or the menus. You see that's all bricks there behind here with bricks on the side. And I changed that to using red bracket plates. And therefore, that meant that the menu could go higher than the top of the first floor, but the first floor could remain at that constant level. And by sort of fencing off this corner bit that would protect the burger from getting hit by the floor above, you can see that some important progress was made. And there I've put in the stairs. I didn't use the pre-made stair pieces just because it would take sort of 1.5 of them to get to the right level, and that isn't much good to anyone, so I did the whole thing out of bricks. So some of you may be wondering what these pieces are doing in pink, and that's just so I can very easily add the first floor back, the second floor back on, or take it off again. So if I were to grab this, for example, and want to see it in position, I could drag it on and put it on top. But then if I wanted to get it off again, I could just take that away and then grab it to move it off. So I find that just having them a bit different colour makes them very easy to pick up, and for you to be able to design this on its own and then quickly check that it's still all right when you put it back. Right, so some important progress was made on the ground floor by that stage, but we're still struggling with the top floor. You can see this corner is very ugly with these wedge pieces not working, these square corners on the plates that make up the ground floor, and even bricks sort of hanging off the bottom that probably easily get knocked off. So not excellent there. And it doesn't look much better on the inside either. So next version. Doesn't look like much progress there. We've started to get the roof now and integrate that with the floors above. And you can even see the beginnings of what ended up being the roof, though we've still got the concave corner rather than the, convex corner rather than the concave corner. But I've done some progress in that I've started to incorporate some tiles and really tidy up this bottom edge here. Moving on. Now here's another important step that we made, which is turning that convex corner into a concave corner, which means I basically just flipped these pieces all around by 180 degrees and the windows themselves. And that, as you can see, created a lot more space for the fries and the milkshake. And already that looks a lot better. And you can kind of see the next logical step is to kind of get rid of this entire level here and have all of this go down one brick and actually meet the first floor a lot more seamlessly. Then I've started to put in place the tent, the stairwell, and because I had that problem on the outside with this floor being a lot higher than the rest, at one point I actually had a space under the floor for storage. So you kind of have a split level floor with one bit at this level and one bit at the level above, with long things like oars being stored in between the two. And it's a bit more familiar now, isn't it? Because we've got all of the recessed windows on jumper plates, and we've even got these white columns split by gold 1x1 round plates, though they ended up being silver, as you might well know. And the roof is still on a convex curve rather than a concave curve, with this not too ugly overhang. So all of those versions represent a lot of work. So don't think for one moment that this, just because it's digital, isn't a very time-consuming process. But it does have its advantages, because you don't have to put away loads and loads of pieces each time. You don't have to get a complete mess. And best of all, you can build with pieces that you don't actually even own. Fantastic. So once we decided we were going to do an outdoor adventure shop, I knew I needed a sign for outside. So here are the early designs. There's one with a rope, an ice axe and a snowshoe, all on a plain coloured background, which it's very easy to change, of course, when you're in a digital thing. Rather than having to rebuild it in completely different colour, you can just get your paintbrush out and change it. So next one, I decided to incorporate a backpack, which is a bit difficult because you need to use a jumper plate buried in the sign, but I quite like that idea with this gold round bit representing a compass. So that was quite a nice crammed sign. There's the same thing in a different order. And then here's what we ultimately ended up with, roughly, with a mountain, an ice axe and a compass. But I tried different combinations with different shaped wedge plates and so on. And it's when I realised that none of these modified bricks were actually available in normal green that I moved to dark green and had the modified brick bit being in the medium blue layer. So that is the sign we ended up with. And there you can see it applied above the doorway on this version of the build. And this is when I finally sorted out the troublesome corner. So you can see there, it's all at one level and all tucked behind these raised menu signs. But it's still quite high because you can see there's a lot of grey showing above here. But nonetheless, that's it pretty much sorted out. So if we grab that whole layer, we can have a look at that. So I basically did a diagonal edge, which is exactly how we ended up doing it in the final version. And that just tucks against this diagonal brick piece. So that was the plate layer sorted. And then all I needed to do was to work out how that would dovetail with the concave corner. And you can see here I did lots and lots of different versions of the same thing. And that's what's great about doing digital design. You can do a version, keep it, do a slightly different version, compare the two and see if it's an improvement or not. In fact, you can keep going for loads more than two as well. I mean, here we are with a curve at the bottom, with the sign being replicated each time. So that's with them being vertical, that's with them being a bit set back from the burger. And then another one there, still with this overhang and the gold bits here. Then here, I've experimented with making it a bit longer with repeating windows, but with a 2 brick gap in between them. Another one there with 3 windows and a single brick between them. So that's what we ended up with. And you can see here for the first time we're using those silver 1x1s, at least on the roof line anyway. And then here, this is pretty much what we ended up with, almost, with the inverted slopes here, but we didn't end up with the normal slope layer here actually, so this is still quite a way off. And you can see that these are all 1x2 slopes, and that's just because that's probably the only ones that were available in that colour, which is somewhat of a limitation, which is probably why I didn't end up using them, because it wouldn't have been crazy strong. And then, although we've still got the slopes there, we now have the concave corner on the roof. You can see it's still not perfect, because we've got gaps here and there, but that will look very familiar, albeit with a very sort of square roof. So with that last one put in place, we had a good idea of where we're going to end up. And you can see that row of slope pieces is now vanished on this version. So we've gone up another level now and another iteration of improvement. Still got quite a lot of grey space in here, but that's going to get sorted out soon, I think. And while I was just mocking this up, there were 2 large things I wanted to sort on the inside. One was where the intermediate floor would be, and you can see I've put it at this level. Now, when I did this, I realised it was going to be very close to a lot of other things, and if I did want to have a raft or a canoe in, and also avoid having to put a second set of stairs in, which there's no real obvious place for, then this is where the idea of having a mezzanine floor came from. And it was purely just because I had these plate pieces in position, kind of where the mezzanine actually is, just because I was paused at that position in designing, just so I could see what I was doing. But that happy accident meant that it sort of looked quite familiar to me when I got more advanced with the design. Now, talking about cramming everything in, this is the stage when I decided to put the biggest thing, being the tent, inside the outdoor shop. And that was just to see whether it fit, really. And it already became quite obvious that it was a big thing to try and shoehorn into a very small space. And that's when I came up with the idea of saving 1 layer of studs by having the hooks, or rather what would have been ball joints, but they're kind of these other modified plates with a grabber, into the wall themselves. And the only way to accommodate them was by having, instead of bricks, having panel pieces lined up with those, just so when we build that wall, there isn't either a hole in it or 2 bricks sharing the same space. So that was my early sort of proof of concept. We've still got some untidy bits here, and we've still got this sort of thick grey layer on, well, all the sides in this version. but still it's progressed quite a long way already, as you can see. Next version. So there we focused on that grey layer, and now it goes straight from the red menus right up to the medium nougat colour. We've still got these which didn't make it in the final version, but you can see it's a lot more coherent. We've got that roof dovetailing in, and now we've got this bit coming out the back. In all the previous versions, although we had the floor in there, the roof here was pretty much oblong, without this bit being inside or outside really. So this is the first proper full building, and we've even got some early air conditioning on the top. All of the columns have moved to have these silver pieces in them rather than the gold, and we've got the Holy Trinity sign in its final position. So from this point on, the outside was largely done. It was more about getting stuff done on the inside. So I brought back from the earlier version all of the camping gear. I even mocked up 2 different tents for different colours or different shapes of that. And I even brought in the canoe. Now I thought I could probably fit that in as well. Got these representing the sleeping bags that are on the wall, and even a couple of mannequins to use as well. And I think it's useful to get all of the bits that you might want to use in one place, just so you can kind of strategize where everything's going to go. So now most of the progress will be on the inside. So if I just lock the roof off, put that to one side for a moment, you can see I'm starting to put the bigger items in. I'm experimenting with the raft on that wall, which is where the canoe actually ended up. I've put in the climbing wall, split into 2, so it goes one half with each half of the building when it's split. And you can see I've put in the air conditioning units, because that's basically using the same section of wall that is holding up the climbing wall. And now you can see I've sorted out most of the ugly areas on the back by having some consistent stripes. Oh, and here's the flower boxes as well for the first time. So I still haven't populated the pawnbroker. That's empty apart from the oriental carpet near the door. The pharmacy is pretty much finished and has been for a while. And this is when I started putting a bit more detail into the stairwell. So you can see I've got the modified bricks on the outside here. I've got the modified bricks, profile bricks here as well. I've put in this back door underneath the stairs and all this tiling in the hallway. And I've coloured these pink, I think, to say that I haven't finished with that. They're temporary in position, but I have finished the hall light. And you can see I'm just about to put in the snowshoe handrail for the stairs. So already we're making a lot of progress. And here again is just a cross-section of all the parts available in each of the 3 main colours that I'm using, so I don't use pieces that don't exist. So to finish off the build, I needed a few clothing rails. So you can see here I was experimenting with different types. Here we've got one on a pole, but with torsos facing each way, which is quite a nice one. Might use that somewhere else actually. Here's the round one that we did end up using, albeit with some slight different cosmetic changes needed. And here's a wall-mounted one that didn't end up getting used either. But it's good to try out all these things in a bit of clear space before trying to incorporate them in the build. So now you can see here I've actually managed to finally get this edge nice and neat. Still got those on. They didn't make it. The next floor has got, well, the raft on that wall still, but we've got the ladder in. The bottom of the climbing wall's still in. We haven't done the backpack wall yet, but we do have the banister in the pawnbroker and the window table. Good, good. The next version, which I've had split out, is looking incredibly familiar, because I think this was the final version I did before starting the series of videos. And you can see I did a redo of the inside of the fast food outlet, in that I put in the serviette dispenser and some chips and 2 tills rather than that large windscreen piece. I've also been adding little pieces throughout. So there's an air conditioning unit there. and I've started to populate, or entirely populated, the pawnbroker shop with a man and all sorts of kit that made it into the final one. I finally changed the awning on the pharmacy from that yellow and orange that it started off to the white and green. And these represent the printed pieces that I ended up using that are actually 4x3. Then the next floor, I've populated the upstairs of this. Now what I did with this was actually look at what parts I actually had in real life before deciding what would go where. So I knew I had a whole collection of guitars, for example, rather than just using loads of guitars and then having to go and buy them, which would have been a lot less sensible. And I knew I had a pink and black stereo, and that's the bulldog statue and all the rest of it. And here I've managed to put all of that good stuff from my pile of outdoor adventure stuff inside. So we've got a helmet, we've got the sleeping bags, we've got that carousel. The canoe's made it onto the wall now. There's one of the mannequins, the rack for the oars. We've actually got in, now we've got the blue and green tent in rather than the red one that actually finally made it. And there is the backpack wall for the first time. Very good. Next floor, we've got the climber attached to the wall with the devices at the top of the wall to help him climb up. We've got the raft on that wall now, and all of that good stuff on the inside of there, which made it as well. And the two roofs. So this, when all added together, it's important to have them separate so you can work on them very well, but it's also important to have them all together so you can admire it all together and check that it all fits very well. And you can see that that is very swish indeed. Very thin grey rows there with the different bits on top of the pillars there, and a very thin layer there as well. And with this floor attached to that floor, which was very important to me. So that should be very familiar. And then the only version that's after that was the one that got developed whilst I was filming and whilst I was getting all of your wonderful feedback. So this has got the stuff outside, the scene on the back, the birdhouse, and all the other changes that you suggested, like the flask on the inside window. What else was there? The second mannequin, the change to the clock, and so on, all the way to the end. And there's even the bird. The new bird, unfortunately, isn't part of LDD. So there we have it. The final build in all its glory. Now, I appreciate that that's been a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but I'm sure this video is already far too long, so I'm going to bring it to an end there. I do anticipate doing a whole line of design videos where we can actually design something from the ground up and maybe learn about some of the most basic principles all the way to advanced techniques. But the problem I've got, as I mentioned at the beginning, is the fact that LDD isn't being supported. So basically, I'm going to have to learn how to use Bricklink Studio to the same ability that I use this program currently before I can really preach to anyone else. So I have added links in the description of this video for both LDD, if you want to download that, also to the Bricklink Studio, if you want to download that. I've also added a link to my new Patreon that a couple of people suggested I set up, and that's just if you want to help support the channel. I'm not going to push it at all, but I will be putting the PDF instructions and the Lego LDD file for this final build on there in due course, so people who are donating through Patreon would be able to download that very easily. And for those that have asked, the piece count for this is, although not strictly accurate, 2,841. It'll be a bit less than that because these window pieces are actually one piece rather than loads. And it depends whether you include minifigures or not. I do have a few minifigures in here, but not as many as in real life. And whether you'd count those or not is another point open to debate. But yeah, it's quite a lot. 2,800 is probably about the same as the Town Hall modular, but bigger than all the other modulars bar Assembly Square. So I do hope that design video was interesting and informative. It's very difficult for me to gauge exactly what such a diverse audience would like, so do give me feedback on this video, especially because it's the first video I've done with a live screen, and I found the subject a bit too big to fit into a coherent sized video, to be quite frank. But anyway, do let me know how you found it. So as always, thank you very much for watching. Do remember to like, comment and subscribe as usual. And next time on Robin Hood Bricks, we'll be going back to Brick Nottingham for another city update. See you then!